The story of how an 8-minute film about a lonely astronaut who decides not to return home took 13 years to get made. On September the 11th, 2001, in New York City, an airplane flew into the Twin Towers. The buildings burned and people were jumping out of windows to their death. Everything was covered in a thick layer of white ash. The world had become a pit of despairing disillusionment, and America was in a neon doghouse. It felt like the end of a big, bad, beautiful, and ultimately deceptive and violently abusive relationship. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had been doing a heavy spate of late 60s and 70s psychological sci-fi movies, stories of men trapped in space, lonely, depressed men in peril, lonely, depressed astronauts' wives waiting patiently back home on Earth, trying desperately to remain calm and strong for the children, for the country, for their lonely, depressed husbands trapped in space. In 2004, a motif was plucked from a Yamaha SY77 keyboard towards the end of an unproductive studio session with my sound production partner Jack Henney from Cargo 77. The melody sent me off down a rabbit hole of feeling the loss that comes from failing to communicate important things or be heard. I wrote Lost in Space in 2 hours, a short play about a satellite fix-it guy who has an emotional breakdown on the job and decides not to return home. I called him Larry. The next day I recorded a blueprint for all of the voices, and me and Jack began to establish and assemble all of the sound particles. I wanted it to feel like a warm, supportive hand on the shoulder when the ship is going down and you need a strong friend. Not too cute, not too sad, just present. I asked my best friend to play the parts of both Jim and Joe, the jaded ground control. Later on, he would become the 70s Italian soft porn voice of Radio Studio 79, my hero. I wrote a handwritten letter to Jack Henney's dad, Del Henney, asking if he would consider playing the part of Larry's father. Del Henney is best known for playing Colonel Archer in Doctor Who's Resurrection of the Daleks, and his role as Charlie Venner, the rapist in Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, 1971. I was extremely pleased he agreed to do it. His voice, emotional tone, his delivery was just more than I could have dreamed, and it was an immense pleasure to spend some time with him. I voiced both the parts of Larry's abandoned wife and the ship's sentient intelligence system. It took 6 weeks to get to a point where we both felt it was a completed piece of audio work. It felt special. It meant something. Then it just sat there. It sat there for 10 years, not quite knowing if it belonged anywhere. I moved in with a French guy. I moved out. I fell in and out of love with a musician. I needed brain surgery. I drank too much. Sometimes I would play Lost in Space for guests as a strange little alternative after-dinner entertainment. I turned 40. Where was Larry? In the summer of 2014, a friend asked me if I would consider making it into a film so that Tate Britain could present it as an audio-visual piece. I knew I wanted it to be an animation, but I had absolutely no idea how to even talk the language. So I called a techie friend, Philip Mayer, builder of domes, to ask if he wanted to make a film with me for Tate Britain. He said he would. Then I told him we had 6 weeks to complete. He said we could try. I had been collecting a mishmash of images, oil slicks, northern lights, nebulas, auroras, 90s pop videos, and was overdosing on Tron 1982. I began to pull a storyboard together and realised This needed to be a visual recording of the inside of the brain processing important emotional information. We created a color palette and began to experiment with movement and texture. I wanted each character to have their own color, form, and movement style. It ended up stupidly naive and clunky, and completely missing an important tunnel sequence where we journey into Larry's mind as his father is speaking. I wanted to lead the audience into a personal experience of the devastating effect this has on him. The one sequence that was most important to me was never fully realized. It is right at the end, where a cacophony of all of the elements are melting into one another and becoming an all-encompassing mandala, which would then implode like an atom device, destroying everything. In the end, it became the secret love child of Brian Eno and Laurie Anderson, all grown up and touring with the Ra band. It wasn't the dream, but we had a film and we completed on schedule. Lost in Space was shown at Tate Britain as part of Late at Tate Spaces Between in August 2014. Duncan Jones made Moon.
I called you, but there was no answer. So I left a message. I miss you so much. I said, I left a message.
Yes, the cool green hills of Earth look much better up there, John.
There's one more thing I have to tell you.
I just wanted to be a good father.
For God's sake, I need you back home.
I had a real good day, Larry.
I seem to have failed.